Hello, and welcome back. Today, for our third special podcast, in collaboration with Birdlife to celebrate the International Day of Forests, I speak with Mami Rasamoelina, Forest Program Manager for Africa. Mami describes his upbringing in Madagascar and his ongoing work across various nations in different climates, states of poverty, and vulnerability. He goes into detail on the methods used by Birdlife to successfully bring about positive conservation change, the behind-the-scenes challenges that conservation organizations face, impacts on local communities, and future predictions. If you like this episode, or like to follow more of Mami's work, please follow the links in the description. And if you'd like to support us, you can make a donation at restoreplanet.org or follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. Enjoy the conversation. Hello and welcome back to a special edition podcast from Restore Our Planet. I'm here to join with Mami Rasamoelina from Birdlife Africa. So Mami, good afternoon. How are you?
Good afternoon, Jack. I'm good. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. So, Mami, to kick things off, would you mind telling us a little bit about your background and your upbringing?
Sure. My name is Mami Rasamoelina. I'm from Madagascar. Born there, raised there, finished my studies there, and worked in the conservation field for quite some time now, a little bit more than 15 years. And that's passionate about forests, nature in general, but forest more specifically. And I'm now the Africa Forest Program Coordinator.
All right, nice. Can you tell us a little bit about the... Oh, sorry, at Birdlife Africa.
Yeah, at Birdlife Africa.
Absolutely. So would you mind telling us a little bit, for those who might not know much about Madagascar, the general state of conservation and trees and other sort of habitat conditions?
Sure, definitely. Madagascar is that, that big island off the coast of Africa, to the east coast of Africa, something like 250 miles away from Mozambique. And it's considered by many as a subcontinent, basically, because it's big. It's a country that is the size of the same size as Kenya. It is famous mostly for its biodiversity. The plants and animals. It has a lot of a very high level of endemism, which means plants and animals that cannot be found anywhere else than in the country. And in terms of forest, Madagascar has different types of forest across the country. You can have rainforests to the east, dry forests to the west of the country, spiny forest, which is a totally different type of forest in the south. We have mangroves as well. With 5,000 kilometers of coast, we have quite a bit of mangroves, especially mostly on the west coast of the country. The country is, just to provide you with a little comparison, an idea of the country. Madagascar is the same size, more or less the same size as Kenya, but it has half of the population, 25 million.
All right. Yes. Okay. It's a nice little start there. So, of course, Africa is a very big continent, and you work for Birdlife Africa, which means that there are many countries, an area of work that you're involved with. So let's start with got a little bit of a list here. So tell us about your work in Sao Tome and Principe to kick things off.
Sao Tome and Principe, our work, Birdlife Africa work in Sao Tome and Principe focuses mostly on the protection or the protection of two of the protected areas there. So basically, it consists of putting in place measures and mechanisms and structures, management structures that would ensure the protection and the sustainable management of the resources in those protected areas. Why protected areas? Because protected areas are those forests we are talking about forest protected areas. There are also marine protected areas, but we are discussing about forest terrestrial protected areas here, and mainly forests. So those are places, forests that have high biodiversity, that has a lot of, they are the habitat of plants and animals that are still in more or less in an intact form, that should be preserved from conversion into other types of land use for agriculture or for any other type of use, basically. So yeah, so some of the work we have in Sao Tome and Principe was to put in place those management plan for the protected areas. The structure, that the management structure, like ensuring that there would be accountability and responsibility, and also budget to accompany those mechanisms, those structures.
Okay, all right. So moving on a little bit, geographically speaking, that is. So tell us about your work in Sierra Leone and Angola and Liberia and that part of Africa.
Yes, another part in the continent that we work on is the West Africa sub-region. And more specifically, we are focusing on the Guinean forest of West Africa. It's a specific type of forest which can be found between from the west, between Guinea and Nigeria. Cameroon, the border between Cameroon and Nigeria. So it's across the forest that we can find across that area is called the Guinean forest of West Africa. And we are focusing within that, we are focusing more on the Gola landscape, which is a transboundary forest between Liberia and Sierra Leone. And our work there consists in predominantly in Sao Tome, to ensure that the protected areas are sustainably managed, but also because in that part of in those forests there are lots of pressure. So actually in Africa, it's the Guinean forest of West Africa recorded one of the highest deforestation rates between 2000. It quadrupled in the past few decades. So it's really under threat. So that's one of the reasons why it's a priority area for us to work in. Around the protected areas, there are people living or dependent on the forests, right? For their living, for their subsistence, but they are not living inside the protected areas because it's still a thick forest, rich in biodiversity. So another aspect that we are working on is the community forest management. So the community forests play a role of buffer, basically, around the protected areas. So the idea is to provide, to raise awareness of those communities, to be aware of the value of the forest, and to provide them with alternatives as well, because most of the time it's because of the fact that they don't have alternatives for their livelihoods, that they encroach in the forest and clear them for having agricultural land or something like that, or mining or poaching, hunting animals, or so on. So that's another area we are working on. The third,
East Africa.
Yes, East Africa. In East Africa, an element that is not so much present yet in West Africa or in Sao Tome is the fact that Birdlife is having quite a large project in terms of reforestation and forest restoration, which means planting trees to replace the forest that was damaged before, basically. Whether it's still within a forest, a standing forest, but which was selectively logged or which was degraded partly, or outside of the forest where trees need to be planted because of different reasons for energy purpose. One thing we shouldn't forget is that in many countries in Africa, charcoal or fuel wood is still the main source of energy, especially for cooking. So timber, the wood, is still very much important for the households, for their survival and for their subsistence.
And so what is Birdlife doing in that case? What is the challenges to try to change the sources of energy? And what are the alternatives?
There are one of the options is planting trees. Because if people have to use wood to make charcoal, for example, or to use as fuel wood, they have to take it from somewhere, and the easiest way would be from the forest, right? And if there are plantations that are closer to the village or trees that can grow faster than it would grow in the primary forest, that would provide an alternative already for people to use within a few years, as opposed to a primary forest. Tropical forest would need a lot of several decades to reach their mature stage. While plantation would be mature and ready to use, especially for energy, within 5, 6, 7 years. So that's one alternative. And our work in Kenya, in Madagascar, it's starting as well, is to provide support to the partners, national Birdlife partners, especially in Nature Kenya and a city in Madagascar, for them to conduct reforestation and forest restoration work in priority landscapes. For example, in Kenya, for example, our partners, Birdlife partners, Nature Kenya, is conducting large-scale forest restoration work in Mount Kenya, which is an area that is the water catchment that provides, basically, it means it collects water, the water, and releases it gradually to provide water for drinking water for a big part of Nairobi. So it's the reservoir of the outskirts of Nairobi.
What have been some of the challenges of Birdlife initiatives? For example, you mentioned that before the podcast, you might have had a few stories of things that happened with some people in some instances.
Sure, definitely. There were. I have an example, an anecdote. We were, we were working in community forests management, right? So those are, you have to get awareness, to raise awareness for people to include, basically to
it's okay.
Basically it's for people to let me take it again.
Yeah, of course. Take your time.
Let me redo it. Actually, the example I was thinking was not at Birdlife. It was from another experience, but I think
That's okay. Tell us about your experience. Tell us about your
It's
experience, and then we can talk a
yeah.
little bit more about BirdLife's impacts in local communities. So tell me about your experience
Yes.
first.
Yes. Okay. One of an example of a challenge that I encountered in my career was, like the community forests um, are intended to be the buffer zone around protected areas where if there are activities, the communities would be able to control it to mitigate the pressure on the forest in the protected area, in the core inside of the perimeter. So if the community forests are the belt around the protected areas, but communities are not homogeneous, right, all around the protected areas. So the challenge we encountered was that there were several communities that were against the community forest management. It's their land. They cannot be forced. They cannot be obliged to comply with, to be part of the community forest management. But the impact was that if pressures comes from those community forests who refused to be part of the scheme, then the efforts of all of the other would be in vain, basically. So luckily, what happened was that after maybe a year and a half of back and forth, convincing discussions, campaign awareness, and when they started to see that their neighbors, the communities that live next to them, got some benefits from the community forest management, then it was them who asked us to be part of the structure of the mechanism. So that was at the same time it was a challenge, but in the end it worked out fine. So that's an example of
All right.
things that we encountered on a daily basis.
So now tell me a little bit about the successes BirdLife's initiatives have had with local communities.
Yes. Okay. With local communities, a few examples I can share with you. Like in Madagascar, BirdLife is working on a specific landscape in the southeast of the country, a landscape called Tsitungambarike, where our partner ACITI is working on implementing the forest conservation work on the ground. The protected areas, the protected area over there, it's a protected area. The landscape is a protected area. So as part of the structure, the mechanism to put in place that BirdLife put in place in that protected area was the training of rangers and community eco guards. And from 2000, an example of tangible result, from 2020 to 2021, the number of encroachment or infractions in the forest that were reported went from 52 to 27 in the span of 1 year, just 1 year, because of those controls and patrolling and other measures for the protected areas. Another example of success so far is the training of 80 eco guards and in the Gola landscape. So that's in West Africa. That's also going to be very, very important for the future of the conservation of those 5 protected areas, because in Gola there are 5 protected areas as opposed to 1 protected area that we are working in Madagascar or or 2 protected areas in Sao Tome and Principe. Yeah, so those are a few of the examples. In terms of livelihood, because as I described earlier, most of the pressures that are put on the forest comes from the fact that people don't have any other alternative to live for their livelihood. So one area that is being implemented, that is one result that we already have, is the construction of a center, demonstration center, development showcase center in Madagascar, in that same landscape, where improved agricultural techniques are being promoted and are being the object of exchanges, peer exchanges between different communities, in order for them to improve their practices. So
Fantastic.
those are a few of the things that we have.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. Lots of exciting work going on over at Birdlife. Okay, so with all that happening, what kind of trends can you see happening over? Again, this is a little bit broad, but in all these different areas, are we seeing, generally speaking, positive trends towards a more habitat protected, different landscapes? What do you think? What would you like to see, as well as what do you think we will see by 2030 in these countries?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, Jack. If things go well, we are laying the foundations of the sustainable protection and management of those priority areas for now. So if things go well, the 10 years from now, it should be very obvious that loss of forests, for example, in those protected areas or those priority areas that we are providing, we are working on, would be less than elsewhere. That's the aim, but and capacities of people who are working towards that goal would be also enhanced. Their livelihoods wouldn't be so precarious, because one thing we shouldn't forget is that there are many people who are, especially in rural areas, living very close to those forests that we are protecting, who are very much dependent on them, especially when crops fail, for example, due to drought or flood or something that are beyond their control. So if they have alternative livelihood that prevent them from depending too much on the forest resources, that would be the aim to get. That would be the goal to get within the next 10 years. And obviously, in terms of finance, because it costs to conserve and to manage those forests, there are activities that require money. There are structures that monitoring that require resources, people, and so on. So the finance, if 10 years from now, the idea is to have the goal is to have sustainable financing for those priority areas, forest areas. Yeah, but we're not there yet.
Not there yet. Okay, fingers crossed.
Yes.
Good. All right. Okay. So we're hoping for like a pretty, steady foundation to build upon in the coming years. That's good to hear. That's a good start at least. So, Mami, what should we be talking about more that we might not be?
Yes, that's related to my point earlier. What we should be talking about more is how to ensure that we have enough resources to continue the work in the long term, in the mid to long term. Because the fact is that most of the interventions, most of our work are grant dependent for the moment, which means we have to get funds from donors here and there to finance the forest conservation work. And when the project is rarely does rarely go beyond 5 years. And within 5 years, in terms of forest management, that's quite short. So if we are always dependent on grants grants funding, we are always going to be able to plan only on a 5-year cycle, or 3 years or 2 years. And sometimes the reality is that there are gaps in fundings. It's not that you are applying for a funding that you will surely get it. So sometimes there are gaps, and when those gaps happen, and there's the effort that were undertaken on the ground for decades or for several years would be just lost in an instant. And that's very dangerous. I think that's something that we really should talk more about going forward.
All right. So, Mami, where can people find your work to follow you? And Birdlife, that is.
Yes, we have a website, birdlife.org, www.birdlife.org. Birdlifeafrica.org.
That's the one. Birdlife Africa. There we go. Good stuff. All right. Well, I'll put that in the description. So, Mami, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Jack.